Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's a beautiful afternoon. I'd like to thank the church for the invitation to share a little of my work. What you're going to see today is a combination of my own biographical history, a little Shinnecock and Montauk history as well through my artwork, and tell you a little bit about my work as well as been mentioned. I do a little writing, and that's why I brought a little show and tell today. I was born and raised in Southampton. Currently live on the reservation, Shinnecock territory. I've been an artist, and I also play piano for fun. And I did a little writing. This is the book that was kindly mentioned, New York, No Reservation, New York Contemporary Native American Art Movement. This is something, I work with American Indian Artists Incorporated, which is located in the city. We mount theatrical productions, contemporary Native American theater, visual art, exhibitions, have done literary work. Our director, founder director, is a filmmaker. She's currently working on an independent film. And back in 2017, we published this book. You know, people are really not aware of the long history of contemporary Native American art in New York City. Jean Quick-to-See Smith, who's in this show, you know, she's one of the founders of the movement. She came in New York City in the 60s. She had a collective called Gray Canyon. And the whole idea was that some of our greatest contemporary artists were very much inspired and knew directly a lot of the founders of the New York School of Abstract Expressionism. And we cover a lot of that history in this publication. We distribute it to many Native colleges around the United States. Museum was available at one point. It was a limited edition, so we have a limited amount of copies left, but it's available in many of your finer libraries, I believe. And then I was very much interested in my life and history, and I published some oral histories of my own family background that you can purchase online, by the way. All these are available, with the exception of this one on Amazon. I did a first edition called Time and Memories. When I went away to college at the University of Oklahoma, and I came back in the summer, I used to interview my grandmother, who had a great memory. You know, I had 12 cassette tapes that I recorded of her history, detailed history of the Shinnecock and Montauk people and her life growing up here. And I coalesced them all together by manually, by longhand, transcribing the cassette tapes, you know, back in 2000. Finally, once, you know, the ability to self-publish was available online, you know, I first published this one. And then I did a second edition follow-up to call this one here. You can go online and find them. The history of my family, I guess, as was mentioned, my mother's side was Shinnecock Apache. She was my great-grandfather. They fought with Geronimo. You know, that's the Geronimo group that was held prisoners of war for 27 years out of Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And we have a lot of history in the books that I wanted to make available. Some of it is government documents, all sorts of stuff that catalogs not only his personal life, but his life as a prisoner of war. You know, he was born in 1886 in Arizona, and he finally wound up, to make a long story short, he went to Hampton Institute in Virginia and wound up coming here and marrying his first wife at Shinnecock back in 1916. And she passed away in the influenza epidemic of 1916, and he remarried my grandmother here in 1920. So that was my grandfather. He was a Nedni Chiricahua Apache. And then my own, the other native side, Shinnecock Montauk side, the other great personality I talk about quite often. You'll see in a minute the pictures. Charles Sumner Bunn was my great-grandfather from this side here. He was Montauk and Shinnecock. He was a professional guide and a hunter, and he had many well-known clients that he used to take hunting, back in the early 20s. He was born in 1865, I think. His father was one of the former whalers who drowned on the shipwreck Circassian in 1876 off Bridgehampton. So our history goes back with the ancient whaling peoples, We used to hunt the whales in the dugout canoes, and then joined in with the English settlers. We taught the English settlers offshore whaling, and the first whaling contracts with our people were as early as 1670. So we have a lot of history that I was able to incorporate from the colonial period as well. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, and we're going to get started. Just cover as much as I can for you. And this is one of my earliest paintings, kind of good starter, kind of a romanticized title page, of our history from not only the ancient whaling days, since we have 10,000 years of history here on Long Island in about 6 cultural phases, from the Paleo period all the way up to, and I just hit something, there we go. Paleolithic period, of course, is the most ancient period. I'll go back a minute here. There we go. I was hired to do 2 editions of a series of murals, at first in the late 80s with the Suffolk County Archaeological Association. And there used to be a workshop, a program at Hoyt Farm Park in Comac. And I did a series based on the 6 cultural phases of Long Island native culture, from the Paleo period, such as designated here, all the way up to the historic period. This is what the academics, anthropologists like to talk about, but it's a good way to understand the changes over time of the native people here on the island. In this case, this is an oil painting on masonite panel by way of my process. I usually don't have access to live models, so when I create a narrative scene such as this, I'll work with a series of sketches, do a lot of research in history, reading. Of course, over the years, I've acquired a lot of information to try to be as accurate as possible. And I was very interested, even years ago, back in the 70s and 80s, when there was a gradual renewal of our traditional culture. I was always interested to try to find out what was unique about our people that stood apart from some of the other tribes in the country that were so stereotypes, but known better, you might say. The Plains Indians, of course, were so influential by the image of the native person, but our people here had their own particular characteristics that I always tried to bring out in the work here. Our early archaic, that was a period that came after the Paleo period. This is approximately 5,000 years ago, A lot of the archaeological sites around this part of the island, some of the earliest ones are from the archaic period. When they first began to settle, our people began to settle into villages, semi-permanent villages. They used the atlatl or spear thrower. They got into watercraft by hollowing out the trees and going out and hunting the whale. They knew everything about nature, of course. And they were able to utilize at this time everything that nature provided them. They weren't horticulturalists yet. They weren't farming. They weren't propagating crops. They were, at this time, ancient times, just dependent on what nature provided directly, such as seafood, the fish, the vegetables, the foods, and anything you could think of that could be utilized from nature and the forces of nature. Period after that, transitional, is exemplified by 2 or 3 most ancient sites on Long Island, again, 3 to 5,000 years ago. We had a site that was recently preserved in Southampton called Sugarloaf Hill. I don't know if you read about it in the papers. This is a scene that kind of is a conjectural as to what the ceremony might have appeared to be. The multiple burial pit that was located in that area. There's a lot of issues, of course, that go into the preservation or the reinterment of native artifacts, native sacred patrimony, as it's called, in the repatriation laws that came out in the late 90s. This again showed just a quick look of native territories and all of our neighboring tribal nations that surrounded our area here. We were very much into traditional culture was Algonquin, a woodland culture, and we were very similar in terms of the traditional homes that we made. Lifestyle was very similar from here, the northeastern region, all the way down to the Carolinas, basically. This is the woodland period. This painting is actually 8 by 20 feet in total size. There's pieces on each side you don't see, but again, this is the period when the English settlers first came, 1640. The types of things that our people were engaged in were quite extensive. The traditional arts, pottery making, basket making, harvesting the whale that was considered a spiritual gift from the Creator. They went and had a feast every summer. We have a ceremony today called June Meeting, which takes place, will be coming up shortly, in which they would celebrate. Originally, it was a feast, communal feast, where they would invite many tribes to come and celebrate the harvest, the first crops as they were beginning to grow. And we had many tribal nations that would come, even across the Sound from New England. The period of time now following that period, the 18th century, that was a period, I was always interested in that particular time period because that was when the trade goods were available. The European settlers, first the Dutch and then the English, and our people were accumulated a lot of trade goods that greatly influenced their their material culture, how they dressed, how they made the wampum beads with steel drills rather than stone. And they transferred very readily into new materials because native people were practical. They didn't continue to do things that were much more laborious if they had new materials and technologies available to them. This again, going back again to the earlier period, morning prayer at Shinnecock. This again is based on, is an oil on masonite panel. This, of course, exemplifies the medicine man who controlled the spiritual life of the people there at the time. And we still have those people today. Lots of times they were new herbs, they were specialized in herbal medicine. Other times they did other things. And that was the inspiration for this one. Same thing with this one, going into the late colonial period. Our people, we were very closely related to the so-called Lenape people who occupied western up through, say, around Nassau County, western Suffolk, all the way to Jersey, down into northern Virginia or southern Delaware area, the Lenape or Delaware tribe. Many of these people, we joined in with a lot of these people who are our neighbors during the late 18th century, say 1760 to 90 period. And a lot of our people, not a lot of them, but some of them migrated west with some of the other tribes from the region, such as the Stockbridge-Munsee. Stockbridge-Munsee was a group of many different tribes located near Stockbridge, Massachusetts. And some of our ancestors from here actually migrated west and joined other tribes. The last big event of that group took place during the Revolutionary War in Kingsbridge. It was called the Battle of Kingsbridge. A lot of our people, of course, participated in all of the military campaigns of the nation. And they had, in this case, it was they were all killed by the British soldiers at Kingsbridge. You can see that commemorated in the park over there in the Bronx. But that was something where our people participated in and had a lot of historic influence, at the time. Now this is sort of iconic in the sense that it's typical, very typical of the way the dress was, as a combination of European and native indigenous styles, leggings, shirts that were, the shirt was textile from trade, and then the leggings sometimes were also cloth, but many times still leather or tan deerskin or what have you. This was mentioned in the early documents of Henry Hudson. When he went up the Hudson River, he encountered some of our ancestors there. Some of the people were wearing, and women would wear the cape or the mantle of feathered, embroidered feather work. And that's what the inspiration for this was. I wanted to make my own description of some of the early chiefs who signed the earliest deeds of our people. 1640, the first deed was town of Southampton. One of the sachems, the leaders, was signed by this man here, Mokamanto. There's actually a Mokamanto Scholarship Fund that exists today through Dartmouth College, Dartmouth University, inspired by this man's name, Mokamanto. But I wanted to make my own, image of what somebody might have looked like at the time period. Again, 1640 time period. This one's acrylic, by the way. This one is a little more of a contemporary approach, I was talking about, I'm getting into more imagery that is a little more contemporary in approach these days, but afternoon rest, this just shows you the importance of the matrilineal society that we had traditionally. And we also had women chiefs. If the head man passed away and he was married or had a daughter, she was empowered also to be a leader, political leader as well. This piece is up at the New York State Museum in Albany. Again, during 1600s period of time, very much into painted animal hide, painted deerskin, tattoos, certain ways of dress. Our people, of course, traditionally were known very much for the wampum beads, which was used as a means of exchange. Traditionally, it had political and spiritual, ceremonial connotations to it. The designs were pictographic designs that had a lot of meaning in terms of rituals, commemorating things such as marriages, death, commemorating, deeds, political agreements. This is my piece of Wyandanch. Of course, there were two groups after our Montauk people lost the reservation out at Montauk Point. Many of the people gravitated to either Sag Harbor or East Hampton. So you have a community of Montauk people that are still here. That's what the painting over there signifies. In a way, I wanted to do a Montauk people. My piece right behind you there is the one that I did of Chief David Farrell, or King David, as they called him, and his wife, he was the last leader of the Montauk tribe in the 1870s, 60s, 70s. The fact that they still had a presence here, after 150 years and so forth, that's why I wanted to do the painting of them. Anyway, if you ever go to Wyandanch train station, you'll see this translated into a plaque in the train station. Long Island Railroad, they wanted to use this at Wyandanch, so they did a nice job of it too. It's a plaque in the train station over there. Okay, this is a little poetic version of our whaling tradition. As I mentioned, my great-great-grandfather David Walkus Bunn was a whaler, was one of those that drowned on the Circassian in Bridgehampton in 1876. They had been retired as whalers by that time, but they were hired to salvage a freight ship in Bridgehampton, and they all drowned. They were kind of held there by threat of violence, they say, to leave the ship before a heavy storm came in. And as a result of the storm, they all drowned on the ship. But anyway, that was the time where our people were traveling all over the world, on whaling ships. Some of our people passed away in Honolulu. We have some ancestors that intermarried on the island of Tonga, Penrhyn Island off of New Zealand. So we had, influence there. They were very, they were great pioneering spirits themselves because they went all around the world. And as I said, when they got the large whaling ships, they began to go all over the world hunting the whales, so forth. This is a traditional piece inspired by the ceremony that was described in the early history books of how our people would commemorate the receipt of a whale. They would have a Thanksgiving for that. The whale itself was, again, a spiritual entity to them, our ancestors. So even today we have contemporary rites to do ceremonies and to take possession of the remains of a whale on the entirety of Long Island, you know. And usually I used to be involved with a group of young people on the reservation who would go, if there's a whale beaching, and they would go there and do some traditional ceremonialism for the whale, because that was such a highly respected spiritual entity, you know, among the people there. This is originally, yes?
David, I just want to ask you, in the canoe there, you had these faces.
Yeah, it's probably symbolic of a person. Could be symbolic of a person maybe who lost their life, or the people themselves. I'm sorry?
They're like plaques or...
Yeah, they're little small carvings of people. Yeah, That's what our people had. They had small, almost like the Kachina doll, you know, and so forth. In some cases of the Southwest, some of it, but not always. This is the original place where the people, the whales would had their breeding areas until they began to be hunted to almost to near extinction. I think I understand they're making a comeback now. The right whales are making a comeback in population, but they went overboard with everything, of course, and they almost hunted them completely to extinction. Anyway, this is. I'm sorry.
I think it's 300.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. This one you can see it. It's in the Southampton Rogers Memorial Library. They like this one. They have it in the stairwell at the Rogers Memorial Library. Again, it's an interpretation of 18th century image of the people, the combination of European clothing, but also native clothing as well. This is we have a wonderful archival collection of many of our ancestors, some of whom were the whalers. This is another ancestor who lost his life on the Circassian shipwreck. This is the ship where my great-great-grandfather was a first mate. You can see that today over in the Bourne Whaling Museum in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Oh, wrong way, okay. This was a Circassian ship that was one that was destroyed. I think they rescued, or they discovered the anchor of the ship. You can see it by one of the restored buildings, life-saving buildings in East Quogue, I believe. Our people were always joined in with the life-saving stations that were established during the whaling period, because many of the shipwrecks were not just our people, you know, they were people that would circle around thinking they were rounding Montauk Point, and they would go right into Canoe Place, which is called Ponquag. You know, there was a Ponquag lighthouse that was destroyed in World War II by the government. And so there was a lot of shipwrecks that they had to build life-saving stations for. They were built all along the south shore of the island. And our people joined in with them in many cases to, this is my great-great-grandfather here. He probably made that ship model right there. He did Scrimshaw. He was very much active in many ships that have been recorded, and many of the research that you can find on local whaling traditions. This is my great-great-grandmother here, Mary Emma Bunn. She was my great-grandfather's mother. This is a sister of my great-great-grandfather. We have a wonderful collection of photos taken by Rodman Wanamaker. This is from the Wanamaker collection, 1913. Edward Curtis was a very famous photographer of Native Americans in the early 20th century, and he's famous, you know, but not as many people are aware of Rodman Wanamaker. But in many cases, his work was a little more, I think, relevant in the sense that he didn't pose the people that much. He didn't care if the native people resembled the stereotype, the romantic stereotype. He wanted them just as they were, in their Sunday best, you know. So if you ever see Rodman Wanamaker, and his ancestor, my grandmother used to know a relative of his uh, by marriage in Southampton, and she signed the book for Rodman Wanamaker in there. She was married to Wanamaker. This is one of our mass dancers, a similar type idea as a guardian spirit of the game animals. This is a Lenape, part of the Lenape tradition. We had the same thing, you know, we had where you would actually impersonate a spiritual entity that you would make contact with or what have you. Church, our people, of course, worked very early with many of the early missionaries. Some of our people were known to be missionaries, like Paul Cuffey. There was another called John, I forgot his name, it was one before his time. So our people were, of course, very spiritual, and they embraced, in some cases, the early church, the early Presbyterian church that was brought over here, you know, in the 17th century. They didn't all do that, but they were very devout people. And this is one of the early churches on the reservation that was inspired by one of the early spiritual movements from upstate New York back in the 1830s. A new light movement of spirituality. This is a Presbyterian church that was built after the hurricane of '38. This is a great uncle of mine. If you ever want to know about golf, Shinnecock people are very much involved in the history of golf. Oscar Bunn, I did a painting of him last year. It's at the USGA Museum in New Jersey, because he's being finally, 100 years later, acknowledged as the pioneer that he was in the history of golf. Played in the second US Open. He beat the #1 golfer in the world back in like 1901, you know. And the friend of mine, his name is Mark Wagner. He's a USGA golf historian. He wrote a book on Native Americans and golf. If you're interested, it's available online. And he's in the book, a lot of Native American golfers who were very instrumental in the game. And it's still very popular among Native. That's a picture of him there. Covered in the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. This is an interesting aspect people probably never heard of unless you were a golf fanatic, but this is something that's my great-grandfather again. As I mentioned, he was a professional guide and a hunter and trustee of the reservation. And he knew a lot of the people. It's like with the summer colony, in the East End here. I put them a lot of them are in my book. Because my grandmother remembered a lot of these people even better than anybody else. And she remembered many of his clients. One of, like for example, a cousin of his was a nanny to Teddy Roosevelt, And then he knew, he taught 2 sons of Teddy Roosevelt at one point too. So some of his decoy work. This is my picture of David Farrow, the one that's in the painting behind you. This is my version of Stephen Talkhouse Farrow. That's, of course, he was picture of him at the Stephen Talkhouse nightclub, of course, in Amagansett. They may not even be aware anything about his history, but the image is very iconic again because these are pictures, again, taken from archival photographs. I always loved translating, when I got into portraits, translating some of the old elders, into color, making them just as dynamic and bold as possible, giving them a little life, Lots of time the stereotype is the Indian as a specimen, just something that is less human in a way. And I always wanted to put a lot of life-giving characteristics, life-like characteristics in my work. This is a little tribute to my grandfather, who was Apache. This is when he went to Hampton Institute. And he was also artistic in his own way, As I mentioned, his biological father was killed when they were at war before Geronimo surrendered in 1886. He was in Mexico. And then his mother remarried. The second marriage, great-grandfather, was a very famous Apache scout who helped to persuade Geronimo to surrender in 1880s for the final time. So that history of the Apaches, again, this is a Chiricahua group. They, again, the tribe today is located in Apache, Oklahoma, and Mescalero Reservation in New Mexico. So that's my grandfather, that's the one that was my grandfather's father, stepfather, Martine. And again, he's in all the history books. I put a lot of it in the history of allotments, you know, the federal allotments of an Indian land, native land. The history here is a little different. You know, you didn't have the type of allotments that you had in the Western Western states. Here we had more direct ownership to our property. That's Martine there when he was old at Mescalero Reservation in New Mexico. He was a warrior. He's very highly respected because he helped save the tribe from extinction, basically. Geronimo, of course, was a medicine man, and he was very, very forceful, and he wanted to keep fighting, and many of the tribe didn't want to continue fighting because they had lost many, many people, you know, in the battlefield. They were always on the run, and that's one reason their feelings toward, many of them, feelings toward him was dubious, you know, to say the least, because he was so all wanting to continue the fight, you might say. This was taken at Conscious Point as my mother on the lower right there, Marjorie Martinez, the grandfather in the middle, and my great-grandfather upper left, and my uncle kneeling on the left in the front row. That's my great-grandfather again. Our people, the so-called cottage industries, which is what they became, utilitarian art forms, with the scrub was one that was very, very well known. Montauk people made them. Men and women would carve them with a pocket knife. And they would sell them, you know, directly to people. This is way back from the late 1800s. The last person who was specialized in basket making, and he passed away in the 90s. But this is how one of the reasons that traditional arts, or folk art, you might say, can continue is the economic reason to continue it. The economic, you know, they need to survive. One of the reasons our people were successful in hanging in here was the means to survive economically and to accommodate the economy that was forced on them, basically. When they created their herbs, of course, the herbs would be processed in something like this. You know, if they got sick, they had hundreds, if not thousands, of herbal remedies, of course, that were known to them. When the language began to be used less and less, the ceremonial side, the metaphysical side, or spiritual side, decreased, but the medicinal knowledge of herbs continued, probably is still very strong today, of course. Whoops. This is our traditional house made of grass, seagrass or meadowgrass, made of white cedar, and we reconstructed a lot of these over the years. I built a few myself with a lot of other people, and we revived them a great deal in the mid-2000s at our museum. This would be a smoke lodge style type, where they would dig right into the side of a hill and take their their sweat bath in there, which was done for medicinal reasons and spiritual reasons. This is some of our wonderful archival photos, 4th of July parades, visiting tribes. One of the means of revival of some of our traditional ceremonialism was from the visiting tribal nations that came, many of whom still spoke the language, you know, fluently, and still had their songs and dances as well. Of course, the powwow is every year, Labor Day weekend. This is the big front of our museum. There are some of the two dugout canoes that we built in the mid-2000s there. Yeah, clam bakes, some of the exhibitions I curated. This is my grandparents' store that we owned up till the mid-90s. We had that, my grandmother and father started this in 1939, 1 year after the hurricane of 38. And they did it, originally it was just a stand with a table, you know, they sold everything, they made everything they sold. Beadwork, My grandfather knew beadwork. My grandmother didn't know beadwork at first. She was taught lace making as a child. Many, not only Shinnecock, but also some of the Haudenosaunee tribes and the Iroquois people were actually taught lace. The young girls, they wanted to make the people there be so-called cultured, you know, in the European sense. And so my grandmother learned lace making from an Italian countess that lived here. But she eventually got into beadwork, and they began to sell and buy things from other tribes. That's my mother and grandfather in the middle, and a grandmother there when they were still beginning their store by the side of the road there. That's my grandmother there. Oh, you recognize her, Sandy? Yeah, this is one of my portraits I'm most proud of. This is this lady's son is with us today, and I was so happy to see Sandy. And yeah, but I've always wanted to do portraiture, and I don't often have an opportunity to work with a model, but I always enjoy in any form or fashion that I can. You recognize her? She was here yesterday. So I think we're coming to the end. These are some things that you can see at our museum. My book there, available. Okay. Thank you. Anybody have anything you always want to know about Native Americans, but we're afraid to ask? Yes. Hello.
I didn't know about ancestors attending Hampton University or Hampton Institute. What made them choose that school as sort of others, and what was the experience that people had there?
My grandfather there were different factors, because my grandfather, they were held prisoners of war in Oklahoma, and he went to Shinnecock Indian School first, which is I think it's in Kansas. But he was a football player. He was a lecturer. He liked to talk like me. And he would talk about his people, you know, and about Geronimo, because he knew him, and he knew a lot of that history. But he also played football, and he maybe had the opportunity, because they used to get on trains and travel to different colleges. Of course, the most famous boarding school at the time was Carlisle, Pennsylvania. That's where Jim Thorpe attended, and many other Native Americans by the hundreds. And then, of course, Hampton Institute was also a Native American school at the time. And he was of the last generation that he had to put himself through school, because many of the young people were subsidized by the federal government to go to these boarding schools. I don't think when he was older, when he went to Hampton, he wasn't a young child. Well, the first boarding school he went to was St. Patrick's Mission, which is in Anadarko, Oklahoma, and I know that he was probably lonely and had the same experience all the other Indian kids had, because they were separated from their parents, you know, no question about it. Some of the situations were horrendous, others were not. It was very individual situation in some cases, but by the time he got to Hampton Institute, you know, he was playing football, he was outgoing, he used to do shows. You know, a lot of the Native people who visited our tribe here were performers, and that was one means of survival for them. He could speak many Native American languages and also sing. So one of the means of being able to survive economically and make a little money was to perform, or to share the histories, you know. So that's what he did. And when he was at Hampton, so he had a Hampton choir. He was in the choir at Hampton. And that's part of the story of him coming up here and meeting my grandmother, meeting my great aunt in 1916, was that my great grandmother at the time wanted somebody that could help propagate and enrich the soil chemically, you know, on the reservation. She used to sell vegetables to a lot of the, you know, people that lived around the reservation. But the soil needed improvement, and so she had a lady here, was probably a patron of Hampton Institute, a benefactor, and she got Hampton choir to make a tour up to the reservation, perform in the church there. and he was in the choir, and he met my great-great-aunt at the time, who we married, I guess. And so he met them, and he moved to the reservation at that time. So it was a very interesting confluence of events, But our people continued to go to Hampton Institute. My grandmother had the opportunity to go there, other people on the reservation of that generation. She wanted to go. I think she wanted to go. Some of our people didn't want to go, a lot of them. And there was another school called Thomas Indian School, which is up at Tuscarora, New York, upstate. I understand that was horrendous, Some of them were very, very bad atmosphere. And, but, that's what happened there, so. And then, of course, today, Hampton they have a wonderful arts collection at Hampton University today, so. A Native American collection. Yes, yes, sir.
How the museum is part of that effort to get people to speak their own languages again?
Yeah.
And how your family, for instance, did your grandmother speak native languages? Or do you?
Yes, my grandmother said that she had her great-great-grandmother knew a few of the words. That would have been Mary Ann Cuffey. There's a picture of her in the thing. So that she lived back in the 20s. She knew some of the words. I imagine some of the other elders remembered some of the words. But the fluency was gone. They didn't have that anymore. They really didn't. Now, not to say that some of our people in other places did. For example, you go up to Odanak in Quebec, Canada. This is where some of our Algonquin people, ancestors, traveled to, especially one of the leaders of the Montauk tribe back in the 1780s or 90s went there, and he said their language is almost identical to the Montauk tribe, our people. They can understand each other. It was called Abenaki or Abenaki people. They're located up in Quebec and in northern New England area. So some of those people who were related to us can still speak it, just not here at the time. Also, people who are part of some of our people moved out to Wisconsin. There's 2 tribes in Wisconsin that have some of our people that continue to speak the language up until relatively maybe recent times. Stockbridge-Munsee tribe and also the Brotherton tribe in Wisconsin. And then the 2 Lenape or Delaware tribes in Oklahoma. You've got one in Bartlesville and one in Anadarko. They're all in the process of trying to revive the language, When you have a very small population, what are you going to do? You have to speak it. Now here, one of the interesting factors about here, the Wampanoag tribe up north of us, they revived it a great deal. I think they had a longer time period in which it was still spoken fluently. But many of the deeds, many of their political deeds was translated into Wampanoag. And they were able to more easily reconstruct it, with the aid of some linguists. Here, the main source they began to revive in the 70s was the John Eliot Bible. John Eliot Bible. That's the first Bible printed in America, in the Western Hemisphere. That was a translation from the Montaukett language, or the Niantic language in the Bible. So the main syllabary, if you want to call it, or the main written version of the language is the Eliot Bible. So they're able to reconstruct through text somehow. Now they began to speak it, with other people who are still speaking it to get the intonations and get certain things. Though they have a school on the reservation today, and the young people they're trying to teach the young people and use it as much as they can, if they can. Okay, yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was fine. I had a ball. I had a ball. As I mentioned, I forgot to. I was raised in Southampton. I went to Southampton High School, and the only thing I would say is, of course, beginning in the late '60s, I would say in general, the exercise, the expression of Native culture began to take off a great deal in the late 60s, of course, with the social movements in the country, social justice movements. You had the American Indian movement. You had our people join in with other Native American movements to try to be more expressive of ceremonial things, outwards expression of Native culture. Before that time, it was quieter. It was, we knew what was going on here locally, but I mean, we still had our powwow, which was started in 1946, by the way. It's one of the oldest and largest in the United States. So that was a major expression, you could say, one of the major expressions of Native culture tradition was through the powwow, but that's only one item out of an entire culture, one type of item. So I never was raised in that myself. I joined in later. I used to dance and put an outfit together in later years. My mother used to perform because she was a classical singer. She used to sing, concert, singing at the powwow. So some of our people got into European music, classical music or folk music at the time as well. And my father, by the way, he was a concert pianist. He won the Franz Liszt competition in 1946. He was Hungarian in Budapest and so forth. He came over here, became a teacher at Hunter College. But he was an inspiration in anything classical music, So I play a little piano for fun. And my mother, that's how they met. My mother she used to have a practice in Carnegie studios in there where you could go and practice. And he was an accompanist for my mother. That's how they met. And so the classical music, whether you're talking Native American music, which she also sang, or any kind of creativity, that was part of our family. Thank you. Yes.
Well, that was terrific. Great to see more of your work. I'm wondering when your incredible project realized at the Cultural Museum. If you haven't seen it, I recommend everyone to see David's works on view. The question is, when does it reopen?
It's open by appointment right now. It's
it
open
is,
by
but-
appointment.
And who would be, I noticed it was cleaned up,
Yeah.
but who's the director? You're not there. You used to be.
No,
but-
no. We're working right now with the board of directors is in charge. I'm the curator.
Oh, you're,
And
okay, great.
yeah, I'm the curator. I started there in 2003, I think. But right now I'm a consultant curator right now. So, but we, we have, as I mentioned, a major exhibition is called A Walk with the People, which is exemplified by a lot of our murals that you saw in the show there. We have items that have been donated to the tribe and donated to the museum. We have reconstructed items, replications, which is very important because we were able to revive some of our most ancient art forms, such as wampa making from the quahog clamshell, tool making with shell, bone, stonework, burning, hollowing out trees, all that stuff. And by the way, we learned a lot of that from our close tribal friends, the Wampanoag tribe, basically, because they were the principal ones, working at Plymouth Plantation, in Massachusetts, where the Mayflower 2 is. So they were very good experts in helping us to revive things that we used to do, very similar to what they did. Any other questions?
If we wanted to make an appointment to come see, where do we go?
Yeah, I can just give me a call anytime.
To give Dave, okay, we're
Yeah.
gonna call you.
I can give you my number, it's fine, sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Oh, coming.
I just happened to be here this weekend from Iowa, and I've been to Eldon, and I've seen the American Gothic in Chicago. This is very different, and I wondered if you would talk about your process and who the spirit is in the background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is, I said that was just one element. I thought, after I made it, actually, I thought, oh, it's similar to that in a way. But the main, again, the one that came to mind, the idea that came to mind at first to paint these two people was, since the church is so prominent here in Sag Harbor, and this exhibition, you know, is Native American art, contemporary Native American art, and I just thought, well, the historic presence of the Montauk people, and the Montauk tribe, of course, some people are still here. The tribe is still very much active today. We still have a presence today, you know, but we've always been here. But after the time period, I was thinking, when they were trying to maintain their reservation out near Lake Montauk, and some of the people were moving away to try to find places they could work and survive. And this is one of the places. Sag Harbor and East Hampton were two communities of Montauk and Shinnecock people that evolved over the years. You know, they blended in to the society here. And I thought, well, this would be a good symbol, you know, of the fact that not only did they have a historic presence here, but we have a modern presence today. And what I incorporated was the only thing I had was some old etchings, you know, drawings, some photographs, and I reconstructed this idea with his house in the background. That was, I found a copy in one of the early newspapers, and it was taken from a photograph. The man who captured this originally of the actual people was, he wanted a picture of him. Now this is, I understand he was ill. He passed away shortly after the picture was taken. He wouldn't let anybody photograph him. So he gave a picture to the one who recorded this for the newspaper, and he did a pen and ink drawing based on a photo that David Farrow had with him, and I incorporated that idea in his. Then there's a picture actually in the East Hampton Library of David Farrow. You don't see published very often, and that's what I used for his face. And then, of course, Maria Farrow, who became the leader of the tribe for years, even during the court cases in 1910, when they've been fighting in the state of New York to get recognition for. You know, she was the leader for many, many years after his passing, the husband's passing. You can see the two dogs in the lower right. I wanted to put them in as representative of the presence of the traditional, the wild dogs that were here before European contact. There's a type of dog, it's called Carolina dog, I believe. Carolina, there's a feral dog that lives in the woods of North Carolina, I understand. That is the one genetic breed, I believe, that they say is directly descended from the ancient dogs that had been here among our people. That was commented by many of the early explorers, that we always had dogs in the camps, you know, and they thought that was fascinating. And that's what they really look like today. That type of dog is representative of that tradition, you might say, that was taken over the time period. The face up in the air was symbolic of his traditional life, which in many cases was secret. And the maintaining of their culture was secret to the white person, the white society in many cases. You know, they didn't know, they didn't hardly participate in any of that unless they were ministers. There's an article in one of the early newspapers, Brooklyn Daily Eagle, I think, and they talk about a ceremony that David presided over, wearing his headpiece and his Indian garb. It was in the Shinnecock Hills area of Southampton, near our reservation, current reservation. It was a June meeting celebration, probably 1878, I believe. And they said he showed up with the traditional native garb on, because they said he usually didn't wear that, you know. And he was looked upon as being a great leader of all the people there. And the only white man that was present was a minister. And they tried to make fun of him, you know, in the paper by saying he was a reduced white man that took part in the ceremonies, you know. Like he liked to be with the Indian people, but he took his religion seriously, I'm sure, the one that was there, and they were the sort of ceremonial leaders of the event. So that's a symbol of his tradition, native tradition. Yeah.
I like that you show the Asian connection.
So I'm sorry?
I like how you show the Asian ancestry and connection of native peoples in the Americas who are said to have walked over the Bering Strait 16,000 years ago.
Yes.
And you see it all the way down through Mexico into Chile that, you know, there are Asian traits that live to this day.
Yeah, it's, well, that was something, I always think, you know, driving along the highway here, you know, you see the glacial moraine, the high line of hills that go all the way from Southampton almost over to here, you know, all the way across, you go back behind Bridgehampton and those back roads. And I always think, okay, that's where the glacier stopped, you know, and created Long Island. Most of Long Island, you know, south of that is an outwash plain. That's 10,000 years ago, basically, or 12,000. When the glacier stopped there, began to recede north again, and shortly thereafter, our people were right here already. You know, now one of the interesting things I'll end with is that I was involved for a while with the archaeological committee on the reservation, and we were evaluating where some of our most ancient items came from, such as the paleo points, you know, the Clovis-style projectile points that were found. And you'll never guess where they were found. They were found off the south shore of the island under the ocean. Because Long Island, you know, we had like 2 miles more land along the south shore, you know. The change in the conformation of the land, you know, over the intervening thousands of years. That's where they used to hunt, you know, hunt the big game. I don't know if they had giant beavers, they had the elk. And so a lot of those projectile points were found under the water, 2 miles out off the shore, and that's where these most ancient 10, 12,000-year-old projectiles were found. That was all our land. It's considered native, you know. Our interest, especially in I forget the name of the agency, the act now, a federal act, the interest these tribes, federal tribes still have, you know, as underwater archaeology as well, not just what we're standing on, but our rights extend way out into the ocean as well. And we were very concerned. We were always concerned about having access to the area, you know, and protecting the quality of it, what have you. So I always remember that, you know, it is ancient. You know, the influence it goes way back. There's no end to it. And but I always think, you know, that was the thing. Anytime you see a tribe today or hear the music, if you ever hear Native American music, you think how many generations have sung that music. You know, it goes back without counting. It was all done orally. Basically, it was oral tradition carried by word of mouth, you know. But our people, I always throw in too, our people had written language in the sense of pictography. You know, they used pictographic symbols for different reasons, you know. Sometimes they put markings on birch bark, scrolls. They had, you know, they had markings they put on stone, on rock, slate, shell work. Any picture, image you see, you know, had a great deal of memory to it. And when we translated that into wampum beads from the quahog clamshell, white and purple clamshell, and strung them together in the form of a belt, you know, the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois people, are the most well-known for their cycle of ceremonies, and they have a belt. Everything they participate in they present the belt, and they say this symbolizes the event. And they have translators that read the belt, and they do a ceremony by rote for 12 days, let's say. The head man will go and give you the history and the ceremony, and it takes like 12 days to recite it, all by memory. But they use the belt, too, as like a device, a memory device to recall all of that history, too. So people don't necessarily even realize that, but they use symbology when they needed to, and our people would probably put that in a log or a piece of wood, you know, to symbolize a sign or a part of the language as well. So anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, David, and thank you everyone for coming. Have a wonderful Sunday.